escape from the building of terror. Thankfully, Ben was in another location of the building at this time and didn't notice anyone escaping. Though, in a chilling coincidence, Ben ended up running out the back door of the building, narrowly missing the victims, who ran for their lives.
And then all of a sudden I saw a laser come across my eyes. I looked over and I saw him pointing a gun at me. And by that time I tried shifting over, and it just felt like a baseball bat hit me right inside my neck. And then just blood went everywhere.
The director of the center, Herman Toro, arrived on the scene just north of the medical building when he saw Lieutenant Colonel Juanita Warman lying on the ground, gravely injured. Herman and another worker raced to the lieutenant, attempting to offer aid by grabbing her arms to drag her to safety. In an insanely awful twist of fate, Ben happened to be rounding the front end of the building at that precise moment and aimed his red laser sight smack dab in the center of Herman's chest. Oddly, though, he didn't fire, which afforded Herman the opportunity to hide behind an electrical box. The quick reaction most certainly saved his life. Sergeant Kimberly Munley was a civilian police officer on base, her official title being Civilian Law Enforcement Officer for the Department of Emergency Services for Fort Hood. The sergeant was washing her patrol car when she heard alerts coming across about an active shooter. Without thinking twice, she jumped into her patrol car, racing to the scene with lights and sirens ablaze. As she arrived on the scene, Ben was outside the building, and the sergeant may have ended the threat right then and there. Except, there were others in her line of fire as she raised her weapon to aim. At that exact moment, Ben fired, and then they exchanged gunfire as she shot at Ben from her 9mm M9 pistol, which sent Ben racing behind the building seeking cover. Sergeant Mulney ran in the opposite direction, thinking she would corner Ben coming the other way. As this transpired, both began shooting at each other again, and this time, one of Ben's bullets struck a gutter along a roof. This caused some shrapnel to fly about, hitting the sergeant in her hand. The bullets didn't stop there, though. She was also shot in the knee and the thigh, which caused her to fall to the ground. The shot in her thigh caused her femur bone to shatter into about 120 pieces of bone fragments completely. Sergeant Mulney was required to have emergency surgery, where she flatlined twice. However, as the sergeant was laying on the ground back at Fort Hood, Ben approached her and kicked the pistol she carried. He kicked it hard and far enough that she would never be able to retrieve it laying down. Except she wasn't going to take this nightmare lying down, and began to crawl towards her gun when Sergeant Todd appeared, about 20 feet away. He announced himself, which distracted Ben, who was standing over Sergeant Mulney.
Finally stopping the rampage.
He went down, and she eliminated the threat. She did what she was trained to do. This protocol of active shooter to move in and eliminate that threat immediately requires courage and skill. She's a highly skilled police officer. She's a member of our Special Reaction Team, which is our SWAT team here on Fort Hood.
She's a hero.
Yes, sir. She's a hero.
Sergeant Todd looked in utter dread as he noted his chest suddenly light up red from the laser sight on Ben's gun. He ordered Ben to surrender, a command that was ignored entirely, and Ben began yet another gunfight with a civilian police officer, meaning someone who was armed and could shoot back. Sergeant Mark Todd shot at Ben with a Beretta M9 semi-automatic pistol, and in return, Ben emptied his weapon at the sergeant. As Ben reached for another magazine in his pocket, Sergeant Todd shot him 5 times, causing Ben to fall to the ground. Major Stephen Richter ran over to the shooter, kicked the gun out of his hand, cuffed him, and at the same time, Ben fell unconscious. Major Richter covered Ben's most serious injury, applying pressure to the chest wound, which was most likely the life-saving measure that kept Ben firmly alive. Remarkably, Sergeant Todd was not injured. Inside the SRP Center, folding chairs were scattered all over, along with 146 spent shell casings inside and 68 casings outside. A total of 214 rounds were fired from Ben's lone firearm and the police guns. As previously mentioned, Ben's pockets were filled with pistol magazines, and he appeared to still have about 177 rounds on him, including both 20 and 30-round magazines.
He was not through. He had over 177 rounds still left on his person.
A notice was later posted on the Fort Hood website. The shooting was not a drill.
No, Crosby just said that.
Attention! Seek shelter immediately.
Fort Hood was placed on lockdown, and all communications were completely disabled, including cell phones, and cell usage was restricted, unless the government authorized the complaint and warrant. 13 women and men were murdered on November 5, 2009 at Fort Hood, including 12 soldiers and 1 civilian. 11 of the deceased died on scene, and 2 passed away later at the hospital.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
Mass casualty incidents.
active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
Mass casualty incidents.
Michael Grant Cahill from Cameron, Texas, was a 62-year-old civilian physician's assistant who was killed while trying to subdue the active shooter. His primary role at the facility was to prepare soldiers for deployment and returning home. Michael is survived by his wife of 37 years, Jolene, and 3 adult children. 56-year-old Captain John P. Gaffney was from Sierra Mesas. 56-year-old Captain John P. Gaffney was from Sierra Mesas, California. John was a psychiatric nurse who had just completed his final training before being deployed to the Middle East and only recently arrived at Fort Hood, only the day before the deadly shooting. A hero in his own right, John was shot as he charged at Ben. Captain Gaffney loved riding his Harley motorcycle and was a serious collector of baseball memorabilia. The captain is survived by his wife and son. 29-year-old Specialist Frederick Green was from Mountain City, Tennessee, and was called Freddie by his friends and family. Freddie was a loving husband, son, and father who often acted as his family's protector. He was killed trying to subdue the man that wanted to kill him. Gifted when it came to computers, Freddie could build just about anything. Major Libardo Eduardo Caraveo was a 52-year-old man from Woodbridge, Virginia. Major Libardo Eduardo Caraveo was a 52-year-old man from Woodbridge, Virginia. He was born in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, and immigrated to the United States as a teenager. The major earned a doctorate in psychology from the University of Arizona. He, too, had just arrived at Fort Hood before the shooting, due to impending deployment to Afghanistan. The major is survived by his wife Angela and their 6 children. Staff Sergeant Justin Michael DeCrow was 32 years old when he was shot in the chest. Sergeant DeCrow's job was training new soldiers on how to help veterans fill out paperwork. Loved by everyone he met, Justin was married to his high school sweetheart, Mary Kay, with whom he had 1 daughter. He was stationed in Korea the year prior to the shooting and was waiting for a position closer to home to open up. 22-year-old Specialist Gene Dean Hunt was from Norman, Oklahoma. Gene Dean, otherwise known as JD, joined the Army in 2006 and had recently spent 15 months in Iraq. Married to his wife, Jennifer, for about 3 months before the shooting. This young man was in love and excited to share it with the world. He was a quiet and unassuming man who had just re-enlisted for another 6 years of service. 29-year-old Staff Sergeant Amy Sue Kruger hailed from Calm, Washington, and had only arrived at Fort Hood about 2 days before the life-changing shooting. Amy Sue was known to love playing sports, especially softball and volleyball. She lived life to its fullest. Private First Class Aaron Thomas Namelka was from West Jordan, Utah. The 19-year-old was shot in the chest and died instantly, without suffering. Aaron was supposed to be going home in December for a brief trip before being deployed to the Middle East in January. He planned to propose to his girlfriend just before deployment. Private First Class Michael S. Pearson was a 22-year-old young man from Bolingbrook, Illinois. Michael loved to play the guitar and even taught several friends how to play. He enlisted in the Army in 2008. Private First Class found a friend in each person that he met. 51-year-old Captain Russell Gilbert Seeger was a psychiatrist from Racine, Washington, who joined the Army several years before to help soldiers with their mental health. He was supposed to be deployed to Afghanistan in December. Captain Seeger is survived by his wife and 20-year-old son. 21-year-old Private First Class Francesca Velez was from Chicago, Illinois. She died from a gunshot wound to the chest, and she was also pregnant at the time. Sadly, Francesca lost her child at the same time. Having just recently returned from Iraq, the Private First Class was happy and sweet, and known to be a fun-loving young woman who loved to write poetry and dance. Lieutenant Colonel Juanita L. Warman was a 55-year-old from DeGrasse, Maryland. Lieutenant Colonel Warman was a military nurse practitioner who came from a military family. Killed by a gunshot wound in her abdomen, Juanita leaves behind 2 daughters and 6 grandkids. Ben was born on September 8, 1970, in Arlington, Virginia, to Palestinian parents. His father immigrated to America when he was 16 years old in 1962. His mother immigrated in 1963. There were many family members living in Virginia at the time. Ben's parents immigrated, and the family was very close-knit. Ben was the firstborn child, and about a year after having Ben, his parents had another son, and again, 11 years after that, they had a third son. The family resided in suburban Arlington and lived a very Americanized life. They weren't particularly religious, and each of the sons played sports. None of the children could speak Arabic. Ben's folks opened a restaurant in Roanoke in 1987 and called it Capitol Restaurant. They also owned and operated several other restaurants and eventually grocery stores. In 1995, the family closed the Capitol Restaurant and opened the Mount Olive Bar and Grill, which was a more upscale establishment than the previous restaurants. Ben's parents were known in the community as being incredibly kind and warm. They were loving towards their children and extremely giving. Each of the boys worked at their parents' various businesses, whether it was as a cashier, busser, or dishwasher. Their parents instilled hard-working values into their children. Ben attended William Fleming High School, but he didn't participate in extracurricular activities during the high school years. Instead, Ben was studious, caring about his studies above all else. He was brilliant and was never violent, though he was outgoing. Ben graduated in 1988 and immediately enlisted in the Army, which his parents were staunchly against. He was sent straight away to Fort Benning in Georgia for basic training, and then was transferred to Fort Irwin in California. In 1989, Ben enrolled at Barstow Community College and attended classes at the Education Building, located on the base. He was very successful in college as well, landing on the dean's list and earning all A's. Ben took a variety of classes, including English, biology, algebra, and political science, and continued attending through the spring of 1990, which is when his active service was deferred. Ben returned to Roanoke and enrolled at the Virginia Western Community College, graduating in 1992 summa cum laude, with an associate's degree in science. Because the Army was footing the bill for his education, Ben chose to continue his education and enrolled at Virginia Tech, majoring in biochemistry with a minor in chemistry and biology. In the fall of 1993, Ben began participation in an undergraduate research project under the instruction of a woman named Catherine. The former lab instructor recalls Ben not using the proper techniques